Good morning from a smoky San Francisco, but we are still here. My name is Tim Avila, and I am really honored to be part of the Masters of Product Marketing series as part of the Product Marketing Alliance. I'm a big fan of PMA and everything that the team is doing, Richard and team. And I'm looking forward today to sharing with you some of what I've learned over my career in taking great products to market. A little bit about me. I've been, in big companies and in small companies, in the B2B software space, in media, and now I'm the vice president of marketing for a company called Carbon. Carbon makes 3D printers that print really, really fast and that are used to help companies bring better products to market in less time. I'll talk today a little bit about sort of how I think about go-to-market and some of the things I've learned over time. And we'll break it into three sections, sort of listening with empathy to customers, which is really where it starts, how to prioritize and think about prioritization and work closely with sales, product, and marketing to kind of get that process cleanly completed. And then lastly, sort of taking products to market and executing your go-to-market plan. So let me share my screen. All right. The first thing, I always like to start with kind of a controversial statement, and this may catch some folks off guard, but it's really obvious to me that great products start with angry customers. And you may say, but wait a minute, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you think a little bit more deeply about angry customers, they have some interesting characteristics. First, they're really motivated, right? They are looking to change. They are ready to talk. They are looking for new solutions. And a lot of the time, they're your customers, or they might be your competitors' customers. So there's opportunities in both of those cases. And the key for us as product marketers is really understanding that dissatisfaction and customer pain points are where we live. Where great products really begin. Understanding where your product could be better in order to help customers solve really important, really urgent problems. That's where great products begin. And so as product marketers, I think, it starts with really discovering these pain points. And there are some ways that I've learned to do this, just general inputs that are really useful in places that you're likely to uncover interesting kinds of problems. The first is your sales team. If you don't talk to your sales team regularly, I think that's a very good idea. And often they will have direct input that they're hearing from customers, and that can be a clue as to where you might want to start your discovery or your process of listening to customers. So sales input, very, very important. Second is customer support. Customer support folks hear problems every day. They see patterns. And so they're traditionally seeing the kinds of problems that are very common. So it's a great place to start to look to uncover some of those pain points. Another interesting one is around demand gen, that front end part of the process where your demand gen team is seeing and talking to potential customers and hearing sort of what they're looking for and why they're looking for it. This is a great place to expose and understand potentially competitors' pain points and some of the pain points that potential customers might have with competitors. So it's a great sort of potential share stealing and way to understand where your competitors' issues may lie. And I was somewhat surprised to see when I read the PMA sort of 2020 State of the Product Marketing report that there are quite a few product marketers that don't talk to customers regularly. If I leave you with one thought today, I don't think you're going to be successful in product marketing over the long run if you aren't talking to customers all the time. I'm super passionate about talking to customers because ultimately that's where revenue lies. That's where we're here to serve them. And so it starts with that conversation. It starts with constantly understanding, talking to customers, learning about their business, learning about what problems they have. And so I think that's obviously very important. You can do that in a lot of places. Maybe it's at a trade show. Maybe it's working closely with your sales team and sitting in as a fly on the wall on a customer sales meeting. It could be working with your customer support team. All of those are good ways to get started. And then lastly, the last place that I find is it can be a place where you'll find customer pain points is through satisfaction surveys. If we see certain types of customers that are experiencing the same kind of issues, customer satisfaction surveys are a good sort of broad-based way to find problems sort of quickly as well. So those are some of the ways, some of the channels, if you will, that I've used in the past to discover interesting pain points, and I thought I'd share those with you. But once you've discovered those, I think the next step is really listening. It's really talking with those customers, and oftentimes they're going to be upset. And so one of the things I've learned over the course of doing lots of customer conversations is making sure you're listening with empathy. And I think it starts, you may have an angry customer who's upset at you, but you can turn that around or help turn that around as a product marketer, and nothing earns trust with your sales team more than when you help sort of diffuse a tense situation with a customer. How do you do that? Well, first and foremost, you make it really clear that you're here to help them and that you understand the problem. And that means you've done your homework before you join that call. You know what the situation is, or at least have a broad idea of the kinds of challenges that they've faced. And you want to learn more about that with the goal of helping solve their problem. And so as you do that, I think you want to be really clear about the questions and what you want to learn. So you want to talk a lot less and listen a lot more. As Aaron Burr said in Hamilton, it's talk less, listen more, and take notes. In fact, I often ask permission if I can record a session, because then I have an artifact that I can bring to my sales and product teams to just show them, hey, this is what we're hearing from customers, and here's examples of that. You can listen for yourself. But at bare minimum, take copious notes when you're listening, and be curious along the way. Show your interest. Wow, that's an interesting point. Can you tell me more about that? Ask for context. Ask for examples along the way. And then once you've heard those, repeat that back to the customer. This is what I heard you say. This is your problem. You were talking about the fact that it takes too long. Do I understand it correctly that it takes too long because our software doesn't automate these steps? And in particular, you'd love it to automate steps 1, 2, and 3 so that you don't have to do that yourself, saving you a lot of time. Is that right? And make sure that they validate that you understand the problem clearly. And then lastly, ask them to help you ideate what the characteristics of an ideal solution might look like. Sometimes it's surprising, what you'll hear. You would think it would be a very simple solution, but actually they have a number of other ideas that can lead to a better understanding of their problem. And so make sure that you ask them for to help you characterize what an ideal solution would include. And that'll help you as you start to formulate with the product team and with the sales team priorities later on. So once you've listened to the customer, the next step is to really document those pain points. And so you want to make sure that you're clearly saying, hey, I've talked to customers. I'm seeing a similar problem across a group of customers in this particular segment or in this particular persona. I have a brief summary of that problem. Here are my notes from the customer calls that I've done about this, and I've learned about this particular problem, because maybe I've done 5 or 10 different customer interviews, and from that, patterns emerge where I see a similar problem. And so I'm now giving you a link to my notes from those calls where I saw that problem. And I'm giving you characteristics of what an ideal solution looks like, because I've asked that question. Then I'm also showing you how prevalent this problem is across the customers I spoke with. I talked to 10 different customers. I heard it from 5 of them. That's a pretty prevalent problem. You say, hey, roughly just from back of the envelope, this looks like a very prevalent problem, because when I talked to 10 customers, I heard it from 5. That just wouldn't happen randomly. And then lastly, potential business value. Make sure you're always thinking about what's the value of solving this particular problem for our business, whether that's a revenue value or whether it's kind of a customer renewals value, whether it's value in making sure that you don't have attrition along the way. There's lots of ways that you can add value by solving a problem. You just want to make sure that you're chronicling that along the way. And so here's an example of what, one simple way you can, begin to document customer problems. And here's a basic table or a spreadsheet that I've created just to sort of showcase a simple sort of rubric that I've used. which is, obviously the segment of customers that we're going after strategically. I try to give the problems a name, in this case, insufficient security. Hey, let me summarize this problem for you. Customer service agents at our customers are not allowed to use our automated customer data collection feature because confidential customer information is passed insecurely. So as a result, they have to manually transcribe data, and that can take 5 to 10 minutes per call, or maybe 4 to 5 hours per week of extra time. So that's just a significant cost to our customer, and it's something that that they're upset about. So what would an ideal solution look like? Well, an ideal solution would have sort of an end-to-end encrypted way of passing that data. It might be stored on the server and maybe never in the cloud. And the prevalence of this, I heard this from 5 out of 10 customers. So I heard this a lot. And let me give you some examples of the customers I heard it. You can see in the right there. And yeah, the revenue potential here is quite high. We're going to lose a few customers because this is a significant concern for them. It slows them down. Or perhaps this is a way for us to potentially solve a problem for customers where there just is no other solution, and this could help us lead to new business. And that might be a way of showcasing that. And again, when we think about prevalence and when we think about revenue potential, I don't get too cute. Some people are very tied up in, I want to model that revenue. Look, if that's something that you think is important, go for it. But for me, I just try to t-shirt size that. So whether the prevalence is high, medium, or low, and then I try to give a sense of my heuristics I used in starting to understand the rough prevalence of this. And again, it's not like I'm looking for statistical significance in terms of prevalence. It's just that I've talked to 10 customers and I heard it from half of them. And then in revenue potential, same thing. You can model out and spend hours thinking about the potential revenue and using third-party data. I mean, I guess in my experience, I found that really just getting a sense of the potential, whether that's big, medium, or small, I think is really important. And that's going to come into play later on when you begin talking to product and sales about which of these problems you really want to solve. And so to that end, as you start talking to customers, you're going to hear problems over and over. And so the next thing you're going to see is your list of customer pain points is going to get longer. And then it's going to get even longer. And so you're stuck with this, wow, we've got more problems than we can possibly solve. A lot of these are really important. Look at this. I got high prevalence. I've got high potential revenue. How are we going to decide what comes next? Prioritization is kind of a pain in the ass. I'm not going to lie. That's something that's really hard to do well. And this is where a lot of companies fall down, in my experience, in taking great products to market. They're not really focused on the customer's most important problems. And so this is where your experience and where subjectivity comes into play, and also your need to collaborate closely with the sales and product team. If product marketing isn't working hand in hand with the sales and product teams, you're not likely to be successful. But it's hard to do prioritization because there are different priorities and different biases across the different functions that we have to work with. So for example, a sales team, for example, their prioritization lens may be very short-term revenue focused. I need revenue now. And their preferred solution is, I want a big release that leapfrogs the competition and really sets us apart. And they may be thinking about other things, like maybe this is a huge deal, or a huge deal hinges on me having this capability. So there are lots of very specific revenue-oriented needs that the sales team will have. And the product team might have a different set of priorities and biases. So they may be thinking about, hey, I'm measured on the strategic growth of my product over time, and I need this to be competitive and I need it to be efficient. And so for me, I'm looking at a longer time horizon, and my preferred solution might be, hey, I don't want to create big monolithic products. I want to create incremental iterative improvement over time and smaller, lower risk types of product work. And then in other considerations, they may be thinking about building more than they would about partnering, or they may be thinking about, hey, should I build this? Should we partner here? What's the right approach for us in product to focus? Is this something we should focus on, or should we go out and find a partner to help us here? This is core or not core. So there's a set of considerations there. And then lastly, marketing has its own set of priorities and biases. Of course, we want to be totally differentiated. It makes our jobs a lot easier when we can show clearly how we're better and different than our competitors. And we tend to like simpler solutions that have really clear benefits. And of course, we have to think about how we're going to take this to market. So is it going to be really complicated? Is this thing going to be a smaller release? Is this going to be lots of surface area to manage? Again, there are just different priorities and biases, and this is what makes prioritization really hard. One last thing I'll say here, I mean, these are broad generalizations about different cross-functional groups. Every team is different, but it's really important just to acknowledge up front with your partners in sales and product and in marketing that, hey, we have different lenses on solving customer problems. And so we want to bring those lenses and begin to balance and compromise between those. And so documenting those customer problems the way that I showed helps give us a rubric for thinking about prioritization. And we might also bring in other information. The product team might bring in things like level of effort. How hard is it going to be to really solve this problem? And that'll give us more information about solving it. But a great product, again, begins with solving the right customer problems and really focusing on those problems that we want to solve, not broadening the set of problems we want to solve, but actually doing fewer things better. And that's, in my experience, a kind of key piece of that. So how do you do this well? Well, first of all, acknowledge these different biases and align early and often. Openly recognize this with the team and talk about the fact that, hey, we're going to all have a little bit different lens on this, but let's define clearly our goals of what we're trying to achieve with our product development and with what we need right now in terms of sales and what we're trying to achieve as a team. And then let's make sure along the way that each one of those teams has a representative in some of our customer calls. So one of the ways that we can get aligned early is by including folks from product and sales, obviously, and marketing on our customer calls. When we do that, they can see really clearly. They're hearing the same things we're hearing, and it makes having that conversation a lot easier. If you can't do that, or you haven't done that for some reason, but you've well documented those meetings, or you've got recordings of those meetings, really, really helps folks across the company get a better sense of the context behind why and how we can solve problems for customers. So again, really important to get everybody on the same page around and really feeling that customer pain. And whether that's including them in calls or whether that's documenting in ways that enable them to hear that customer's voice and hear the pain that customer's experiencing, really, really helpful. Lastly, the last two things I'll talk about is joint prioritization. One of the things that I learned early in my career that you just can't do without is you got to bring folks from those cross-functional teams, that's the product team, the sales team, and the marketing team together into a prioritization session where we look at those customer problems and begin to prioritize them, in terms of stack ranked order of what do we want to solve for first. And ideally, if the sales and marketing teams can align on, hey, here are what we think are the most important problems, the product team is generally really well suited at that point to start to figure out the most efficient way to burn down that list. So my personal preference is to provide the product organization, hey, here's how we've looked at stack ranking this, and then share that prioritization with product and have them then give input into the process, again, with sales and marketing folks in the room, so that everyone is hearing everyone else's point of view. But we have to start somewhere. So I generally tend to start with sales and marketing bringing their point of view to product, and then product saying, hey, there's a certain level of effort required with these. Here's how we would recommend taking those products on. And then that discussion and that sort of negotiation, if you will, cross-functionally between the teams begins. And it's usually, I find those conversations are the most passionate and also the ones that lead to the best discussion and the most alignment between sales, product, and marketing. So you're going to come out of those meetings with a really well-formed point of view, and ideally it's aligned across those teams. After that, the product team is going to come back with their updated roadmap that's going to show you, hey, we discussed priorities, we talked about where we really want to spend time and effort. Here's our roadmap of just in order how we're going to attack these problems. And I think that's a great model for now getting those products into development. So you identified your angry customer, you identified what the problems are, and you understand the context. You then tracked all those problems, and then you had to go through the prioritization process. And now your product team has developed a great product that looks amazing and you've got to take it to market. What's the next step? Well, I think first and foremost is understanding what that product is and where it fits in terms of its importance in terms of launch. So one of the ways that I think about this is in terms of tiers. So I think about it in terms of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Maybe a tier 1 is a critical launch. It's got a meaningful business impact. It's going to substantially impact our revenue for a quarter or for a year. A tier 2 launch might look like something that's more of an incremental improvement to an existing product. It's important, but perhaps not as important as a tier 1 launch. And a tier 3 launch might be more of your run of the mill. Hey, we're making some minor regular enhancements or adding new functionality or features to an existing set of products. And again, it's a smaller launch where you might have less surface area from the standpoint of go to market. And by tiering these things, it really gives you a sense of your planning process and really helps you, figure out where you want to make sure you're putting the right level of effort in. And at that point, you're really able to draft and test and finalize your go-to-market messaging. You're really thinking through, hey, I know when we went into product what that customer problem was. I want to start back with that customer's problem, and I want to mirror back in my messaging what that customer told me as their problem to them. And then I want to show them all the ways that this new solution is going to solve their problems. So I want to be very clear, ideally very simple, ideally very benefits oriented with my messaging. I want my positioning of this product to be very clear relative to both our competitors as well as our existing products. Where does this fit into my product lineup? The way that all of my products fit together seamlessly to provide you an end-to-end solution. And that solution relative to my competitors is better because, and I'm going to hit those points really clearly as well. And then I always, because I'm a big fan of de-risking things, I love customer feedback. I always like to share my early thinking with a few initial customers and see how it resonates. A lot of times I'll think, boy, I really nailed it with the messaging. I'll take it to a few friendly customers, share sort of this new product, break it down for them, and immediately you'll start to see things in your messaging where they're just 5 degrees off of center. You maybe need to bring it back. You'll find things you want to tweak, things that they didn't understand when you explained it. So it really helps you hone that messaging to make sure that it's clear in your customer's mind what your product is going to do and how it's going to help them. And so sharing that early and iterating on that based on their feedback to make your messaging tighter before you go to market is a really, really good idea. And then lastly, it's about planning and executing, right? At this point, you've got to work with the sales team in terms of developing their collateral. Perhaps if you're like many product marketing teams, you're responsible for helping at least form the training of the sales team around the products and making sure that they've got a technical understanding of how that product works. It's a lot of times also working with your customer success and support teams, again, training them, making sure they're clear on the positioning and the messaging. And then with marketing, making sure that, it's the tiers clear, what we're trying to do here, how important this is. And there's a whole range of channels that, you might think about in terms of taking this to market effectively. So whether it's social channels where you want really short, simple messaging, simple content, perhaps a customer testimonial, whether it's an event or in this COVID times, we're thinking a lot about digital events and webinars. Or in other times, you might be thinking about in-person events, and it might make sense to launch this product around an in-person event. How is that going to work? What's that going to look like? Email, right? We certainly look at email as an important channel around prospect newsletters, around nurture flows, as we think through the customer journey and sort of how we're touching that customer through our standard email flows. And then the site itself, right? So is this a kind of product where we're going to drive traffic to a landing page? We're going to want to make sure that our SEO and our SEM efforts are tied in. We're going to want to make sure that the site's updated across all the key sections with the latest information about this product and how it fits into our portfolio. And then our comms team, I think a lot of times product marketing, is a tight partner with PR and communications. So we want to think about what's the right target media? How should we be setting this up? And what are the core messages we really want to make sure we reinforce in terms of how to position this in customers' minds? It's repetition is the key to positioning. So making sure as we're working with targeted media that we're hitting those key message points along the way. And again, reinforcing that in customers' mind, that can be a very, very powerful channel. And then lastly, maybe there's paid digital channels. So perhaps we're going to be advertising through digital channels or through even other channels, print, whatever it may be. But again, we're supporting awareness, we're supporting interest of this. And so you're thinking through, based on the tier of each of these launches, which of these different marketing channels might make sense, working with marketing, but you're also really closely working with sales to make sure that they're clear. And no one's happier when you're launching a new product than the sales team, because they have something new to talk to customers about. And customer success and support generally loves this as well, because they can solve a customer's problem. And marketing generally, once we're ready to go, loves it because they have something to really talk about, and that's new as well. Last thing I'll end with is sort of post-launch. How do we think about, it doesn't end with you've launched. The next step here is to really make sure that you have clear measures of success along the way. How are we going to measure results along the way based on those business goals we set up front? And how do we do vis-a-vis those goals? Then I think it's a lot of the time we fail to really do a postmortem and really think through, but I think this is really important after a product, particularly a tier 1 product is launched. What were the things that went really well? What were the things that didn't go well? And I think you want to think through those. You want to think about areas of improvement. And I think the last thing that as product marketers we fail to do, because we're often moving so fast, is just celebrate success. Really, reinforce with the product team, with the sales team, with your marketing partners, hey, we succeeded here. Here are the things we did well. These are things we should really be celebrating, and taking a minute to make sure everybody sees that success, and it reinforces how important that whole process has been in your success. So those are a few just general ideas and ways that I think about understanding customer pain points, listening with empathy, thinking through which customer problems you want to solve, and then how to take those particular products to market once you've got them set up. So that's my process. Hopefully that's helpful for you. And I definitely am interested in your questions and your ideas and your feedback. I really love doing these kinds of talks because it helps me learn. I always learn more than what I've shared through these talks. So I'd love to hear your ideas, your thoughts, your feedback. And I really appreciate you listening to my presentation today. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I see. Start to wrap up. Thank you, Richard. I'm looking at a few folks' questions right out of the gate. Emma, what's the best way to start communicating with customers? It's a great question. In terms of customers in terms of thinking about how to get in touch with customers, the simplest way, of course, is to work closely with sales. They're talking to customers every day. You can also talk to folks in marketing to see ways you might get connected with prospective customers. Great venues for talking with customers are live events or webinars. So in COVID times, I think that's going to be more digital events and where we may have more digital kinds of conversations. But in non-COVID times, it might be a trade show or an event like that, where you're just getting an opportunity to be in your booth, talking to customers and learning a little bit more about their business. That's a really low risk, easy way to get started. So there are lots of ways to have conversations with customers. You can be a fly on a wall in a sales meeting. It's as simple as that, but you want to start building that muscle as a product marketer early and often, and building trust with your sales team so that you can be customer facing, so that they trust you in a meeting like that to manage that discussion. So really, really important skill, something that's critical to be successful, I think, as a product marketer. And then Chloe, it looks like, asked a question. Hi, Tim. Please, can you talk a little bit more about organizing priorities cross-functionally, and how to go about settling conflicts? That, boy, if I could probably write a book on that. There are lots of parts about managing across teams. But I think the things that I've found to be the most successful are earning trust, doing what you say you're going to do, acknowledging that we all have different points of view up front, and just saying, hey, I've been doing this a while, but as I look at this, it's likely that you're going to have one set of ideas around prioritization. The sales team may have another, marketing may have a third. So as we bring these together, we're going to want to just talk about it. And I think the best thing we can do as product marketers is instill this culture of discussion and debate. And to make it clear that, we don't really have an agenda in that prioritization other than getting to an aligned prioritization. I don't know that there's ever a right or wrong answer, especially these are subjective kinds of questions. So I think the idea of trying to get everything right isn't necessarily the notion, but instead rather to be aligned across product, marketing, and sales around what our priorities are and how we're going to go to market. Where I see a lot of companies falling down is not being aligned. That's the bigger issue, rather, in many cases, than choosing the right or wrong priority. Of course, you want to choose priorities that really matter, but more importantly, you really want to be aligned on what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're going to take that to market. And then looking really quickly at other quick questions, I see maybe one more that just from Sebastian. Great talk. What's the most common mistake I see when it comes to going to market? Yeah, I'd say there's really two things maybe. One is I see people kind of being two things maybe. One is, I as I just mentioned, I think is prioritization misalignment, where you've got sales saying one thing, product doing something else, marketing on maybe a third layer. Just that's a mess. So I do see that all the time in companies, particularly companies with kind of immature go-to-market capabilities. The other thing I see that's sort of perhaps more relevant to us as product marketers is really taking, not testing your messaging up front first with customers. I talked a little bit in my presentation about the idea of testing out your messaging up front first with a couple friends and family customers or customers you can trust, taking that messaging to them, sharing it with them, getting a sense of where it resonates and where it doesn't. Because I often find, man, I think I've nailed it. I take it into a customer and I find out what I really didn't think about along the way. And that's maybe the best way to kind of pressure test your messaging, is try it out with a few customers first. Let's see if I have any other questions. I'm just looking in the public chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for your really kind remarks. I really appreciate it. And my email, in case you're interested, or my Twitter handle is Tim from SF. I'll just type that into the comments here. And my email, I'll put those in the comments as well. You guys feel free to email me anytime. And I'm happy to share more or help however I can. Hope this was helpful, and thank you so much for making the time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your presentation with us today. So much valuable information there. Thank you as well to everyone who tuned in and for submitting your questions. We'll leave it there for today, but once again, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.